Hi there, welcome to the season 1 series of the mining masterclass, and it's powered by Global Links corporate training, and I'm your host Stembiso Pagati, and I look forward to the next discussion. And first off, let me introduce my colleague and my guest, and Avu, please introduce yourself and maybe state the industry or the role that you play in the industry.
Thanks, Tembiso. So I'm Avhurengwi Nengovhela, and I've been in mining for the last 20 years, having moved from geology to mine planning to sustainability. So 20 years into that world, I consider myself a sustainability professional.
Sure.
I'm still involved in the mining sector. So the work that I do today and the work that I've done recently has to do with that intersection between environmental and social matters.
That's good. Thanks, Abu. Yeah, you and I have worked together before, and I've seen the work and your passion around sustainable mining, of course, as an engineer, and you come with tons and tons of experience in this space. And again, I really appreciate the time that you've made to come and talk to us. I think the first question is around the sustainability goals and how mining organizations should prioritize sustainability goals. Is it a choice? Is it something they have to comply with? Is it regulated, or it's just the right thing to do?
So I think it's a bit of all those aspects.
Sure.
In the South African context, there are elements that are regulated. If you look at the mining sector, you get your social and labor plans, and those are regulatory tools that government uses to ensure that some of the benefits that are derived from mining activities do flow back to the local communities. But when you talk about sustainability goals, and now I'm thinking about sustainable development goals,
Sure.
they are not mandated per se, but it is good practice for the different mining companies to pick the goals that they want to pursue. So there are 17 goals. Most companies cannot meet all the 17. So you need to say which of the goals align with our strategic intent or our strategic objectives, and you try and pursue those. For instance, you may choose to pursue your health goals. So the investment that you put towards those goals will not only advance your own objectives, but they'll allow you to make advances towards meeting that SDG. So health is one thing. You can pick poverty, where you tackle the no poverty SDG. But again, those are, I wouldn't say optional, but they're not regulated or mandated by law. But your social and labor plan targets, which is where for every mining right you have, as a condition to get that right, you need to spend, let's say, about 1% of what you make per year.
Of what you make per year
on social projects.
So, on social projects, So it's a combination of factors, and I was talking at the Mining Endeavour early this year, and almost everyone was talking about ESG and the impact, and I'm going to talk later about the social part of it. But what are most mining organizations doing to implement or even minimize the environmental footprint and reduce the consumption of resources? Are there initiatives that you're seeing in the industry that you want to maybe highlight?
Yeah. Maybe the best way to recognize the progress that the mining industry has made is to go back, say, 100 years.
Sure.
And think about how mining was carried out then. If I think of the coal mining sector or even the gold mining sector, how we mined 100 years ago and how we thought about environmental impacts is quite different from what happens today.
Sure.
Today, not only do you have best practices, but you also have regulatory bodies that will make sure that before you discharge your mine-affected water, first you'll need a license. Doing so without a license means you are in breach.
You're in breach.
Being in breach means you then run the risk of losing your license to operate. But 100 years ago, I would imagine that you could have mine-affected water, and if you needed to discharge of it, you could do that.
Sure.
Similarly, if I think about the impact that mining has on land and how we rehabilitate those areas, today when you mine, if you're an open cast mining company, as you take out your resource, you also need to concurrently ensure that you are rehabilitating.
Yeah.
So that by the time you're done with your mining activities, when we look back, the area where you've extracted your resources from should
look
be
similar.
rehabilitated. Whereas, again, 100 years ago, even 50 years ago, you'll come, take out what you need and walk away.
And just walk away.
And that's why you've got, the diamond mining sector, you've got the big hole in Kimberley.
Yes.
Beautiful marketing ploy. However, you could argue that that is rehabilitation gone wrong.
It could have been avoided. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'm glad. Yeah, we will talk exploration, rehabilitation, and how we could do those practices in a sustainable way. What is the role, Abu? What is the role of community in helping mining organizations do mining in a sustainable way? Is there education, awareness that mining organizations should create in communities to actually for them to partner with mining organizations for sustainable mining practices?
So maybe let's first think about or unpack what sustainable mining practices entails.
Sure.
And I think of it as, there are three elements. You look at the economic aspects, the social aspects, the environmental aspects. But practically, if I think of a mining community, their primary focus tends to be on livelihoods.
Livelihood, yeah.
So if you're talking about sustainable mining practices, first, sustainability from a mining perspective means for how long can we keep mining sustainably. So now you're thinking about economic sustainability. The longer a mining operation runs, the more sustainable the economic conditions within that environment become.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect. On the environmental side, if your mining activities generate, for instance, a lot of dust,
Sure.
and that dust impacts the communities, then you are not mining in a sustainable way.
Definitely.
Because over time, you are negatively impacting the health of your local communities, and that's just not sustainable. And I think we have seen globally, even locally, we have seen cases going to court where community groups are suing big companies for the impact that their mining activities have had on their health. And yes, you may sue and get paid a lump sum, but you can never really get back the health that you've lost.
They've lost, yeah.
So there are many elements to what sustainable mining practices really entail. Because you also, if I think of maybe the communities around Wheatbank or the communities in the gold mining sector on the West Rand, if you close down a mine, for instance, and what you leave behind are people who no longer have access to any form of economic activity, is that sustainable mining? So the definition of sustainability now has to cover closure-related aspects, meaning, yes, you mine, you extract what you needed to extract, but by the time you exit, the area that you leave behind or the community that you leave behind must continue to have some form of economic activity. And that's why now what you're seeing from companies that prioritize the well-being of its communities, they're now trying to create alternative economic activity during and post-mining, so that whether the mining company is there or not, at least there is some form of economic activity. That, for me, has to go into how we think about sustainability.
Yeah. I like you mentioned the after what happens after exit, the community must be either the same when you came there or even better in terms of economic activity. But starting at even feasibility study and exploration, what activities should mining organizations do to involve communities at that very stage around what they're going to be doing in the area, and are they going to be complying with the legislative requirements around sustainable mining? Is that the start of conversation, or you only involve them down the line when you already are mining?
It has to start at that point, and ideally just before.
Okay.
Some of the protests or some of the issues that we see in the mining sector is when you start mining, then when you encounter issues, that's when you think about involving communities.
Yes, yeah.
Best practice would be at an exploration phase. When your geologist goes to an exploration site, it is incumbent on that geologist to engage with the communities, first to introduce themselves, the company, and why they are there. Engage with the community leaders, ideally set up some sort of town hall session to take people through what your intentions are. If you get buy-in at that early stage, now you no longer have yourselves on one side and the community on the other side. You give yourself an opportunity to co-create this thing that you want to do. So I would suggest that at an exploration phase, that's where the community members need to get involved.
Sure.
But you can't just get people involved without providing them with the right information.
Sure.
So there is something to be said about the value of training, the value of engagement, but also the value of transparency in sharing with the community all the information that they need to know. Because once they are on the same page as you and they understand what your intentions are, they are more likely to buy into what you are doing.
Of course, yeah.
And if you can have their support at that early age or that early stage rather, you are then likely to build a long-lasting relationship with your community members.
Yeah, because they're going to ask all the time, what's in it for us? And it's not just promising them jobs or, for them to be part of the value chain, but somehow they need to see the benefit to them as a community, I would imagine, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. Yes, jobs is one thing.
Yeah.
But I think communities around the world now are becoming a bit more aware, a bit more educated as to the impacts of mining.
Sure.
Yes, you can offer a portion or a percentage of the community jobs, say 400 people. But if you're in a community of 20,000 people, what about the rest?
What about the rest? Yeah.
So it's then up to the company to take people through the full value chain of having a mine within their community. That is not only jobs, it's the training that comes with the mining activities, but it's also, again, if I go back to the social and labor plan, the opportunity maybe that their kids would have to now have access to a better school, built by the mine, regulated, of course, by, in the South African context, the DMRE.
The DMRE, yeah.
So it's not only the jobs, it's not only the training, it's not only the schools, but it's really the full value chain.
It's the full value chain, yeah.
That community would be exposed to.
And as you said, that explanation and provision of information at that very stage is very important, that communities can understand what they are signing up for and what is going to be. I was talking to another client that has got a mining operation in Sishan in Katu, and they were sharing initiatives that they are doing to build roads, partner with schools, and because they were a development trust, and that's very critical. I want to move on to a discussion around the role of technology and innovation in promoting sustainable mining practices. And at the Mining India, again, we're talking about drone technology during exploration as an example. Are there examples that you can use using technology to try and do exploration or even mining operations using technology and innovation?
Yeah. I think, again, if I go back to the whole mining value chain, at every segment, there's an opportunity where you can apply technology to ensure that the mining that you're about to carry out is done following best practices from a sustainability perspective. Drone technology is one thing where, if I think of vast tracts of land that a mining company needs to rehabilitate post-mining, you do need to monitor the quality of the vegetation post-mining. So you can walk the 10 or 20 hectares on foot, or you can fly a drone and use the latest technology to get a sense of areas that are recovering well versus areas that need a bit more care.
Okay.
So that's one example. Another example is mining does impact your water resources.
Sure.
So in the past, again, if I go back to 50 or so years ago, you'd mine and you leave behind water that is negatively impacted. The role of technology in ensuring that the bad quality water ultimately gets converted into better quality water. You'll apply water treatment technologies to do that. And again, that's where you take an environmental problem, you apply technology, in this case in the form of water treatment.
Water treatment,
and the water that comes from the other side is water that the community can enjoy. There are companies that give the water to the communities for free. I say give in inverted commas because ultimately you are the ones who affected the water.
Of course.
So it's not like you are donating.
No, you're not doing it. It's your responsibility.
It's your responsibility.
To make it clean. Yeah.
But to answer your question, that's where you can apply technology to make a bad situation a bit better. And in some cases, you can then set up a water treatment facility that is quite sustainable, can partner with the local community or local municipality that in most instances does need water anyway. So that then becomes a very sustainable setup. So those are two things that come to mind. The other would be on, again, if I go back to the issue of dust, it is possible to mine without generating dust that impacts your community members.
Yeah.
So you can apply dust suppression technologies, to ensure that, yes, you're mining, there's dust being generated, but that dust stays in situ or stays put so that your community members are not negatively impacted.
Yeah. I like the dust example because I come from KZN and there's RBM mining operations up in Richards Bay, and I've seen the impact their mining operations has, especially during the windy times in winter. I want to talk a little bit about the reporting and measurement. So how do organizations report or measure social and environmental performance now during mining operations, but focus mainly on the social performance that impacts communities? Should they be reporting those kinds of performances to the regulators, or are they obliged or obligated to report on those?
Yeah. So your social and labor plan typically is a 5-year arrangement, meaning you'll agree with your community members on what the 5-year program needs to have. But every year you need to submit to the regulator an annual report that tells the regulator how you're tracking against the targets that were set. So that's a regulatory requirement. You must do it every year to track progress against what you've committed. So that's the one report that your DMRE will need. If you're a listed company, you also have an opportunity when you put together your annual or sustainability report to report to your broader stakeholder groups on how you're tracking against the commitments that you've made. You don't necessarily need to be a listed company to do that. So on one hand is the regulatory reports required by the DMRE, but on the other, you have an opportunity through your annual report to say, from an ESG or from a social performance perspective, this is how well we're doing, or we have some gaps, but this is how we're tracking. Reporting is not only required by law, but it also allows a company to position itself quite favorably.
Yeah. You touched earlier, Abu, around the open mines that have been exited, that remain open. But I'm thinking, what strategies can mining companies employ to address those legacy environmental liabilities and remediate those impacted sites? I spoke to Gwede Mantashe during the ministerial symposium in Cape Town around the same issue. He said government can only provide so much budget. He actually quoted a number, 140 million to close old sites. And by the time they get to site number 6, they've opened up other areas, the Zamazamas and other informal miners. What is the role of the mining organizations themselves that have exited to really remediate those legacy operations?
So in an ideal world, a mine should never exit an area that's not been properly rehabilitated. However, what we are finding is that we're seeing a lot of those cases. And maybe it's worth mentioning that South Africa, from a closed mines perspective, has about 6,000 mines that have been left unrehabilitated. And those mines have now become the responsibility of government. And that is why now you have the financial provisions where a company is required to set aside funds every year to ensure that in the event that they walk away, government has enough funding to tackle those problems. But ideally, again, you don't want a mining company to exit because now Minister Mantashe sits with 6,000 operations scattered across the country. Where do you begin? And can you truly ever close those 6,000 mines? So the instrument that's used today is to ensure that the financial provision that a mining company sets aside on an annual basis matches the liability that's there. And those figures get audited, they get submitted to the regulator to ensure that if your liability is, say, 100 million rands, what you set aside in the form of financial provisions must match that.
So I'm hoping it does get used for the purpose for which it's intended.
Yes.
And I'm hoping, is this regulated? Is this government commissioned, or is it just regulated? Is mandated by regulators?
It is mandated by the regulator. And as a mining company, it is actually in your interest to ensure that you rehabilitate as you mine. The more you rehabilitate, the smaller your liabilities, the smaller your financial provision. I mean, $1 today is always worth more than $1 tomorrow. So you want to ensure that you rehabilitate as you mine.
I see. I think that's a very nice strategy. I didn't know that. I would imagine, of course, you don't want to leave rubbish behind you, but to rehabilitate as you mine, it's common sense. I mean, to reduce your liability. Tell me now, regarding the compliance with environmental regulations and standards, how do you balance that with optimizing operational efficiency? I would imagine you have to have a kind of a very good balance between environmental compliance but also making sure that your operations are still efficient. Is it easy to create that balance, and what suggestions would you have for mining organizations?
I think the question that you're asking fundamentally goes back to what sustainability means.
Okay.
So you can have a favorable ore body that from an economic perspective is, say, profitable.
Sure.
But when you think of it from a sustainability perspective, saying, can we mine this in a way that is environmentally friendly? Can we mine this in a way that has the right social impact? When you put all of those things together, if your answer is yes, then that mine must proceed.
Sure.
But if your answer is no, it will be very profitable, but the environmental damage will be so severe, then perhaps we should not mine at all. From a sustainability perspective, maybe that ore body is not worth extracting. So from a regulatory perspective, it's always quite challenging where the DMRE, for instance, is there to promote mining.
Sure.
The environmental affairs guys are there to ensure that the environment is taken care of. So there's always that healthy conflict between the promotion of mining and the preservation of the environment. So when you then take a decision to grant a mining right, that decision has to take all of those things into account to ensure that, yes, the mine is profitable, but we are not leaving behind the damage that we've seen for the last 100 years. In 2024, we can no longer afford to do that.
Yeah.
So it is actually good that we are seeing communities rising and saying, you're not going to mine in my backyard because the environmental and social impact of what you intend to do will leave my community in a much worse
position.
I think that's a good thing. That is not to say that mining should not proceed, but it should be done in a responsible manner. And those engagements do help in the mining company, the regulator, and the community finding common ground and still ensuring that there's a mining operation that's profitable, but it's also sustainable. And I say sustainable in all aspects.
I like what you're saying, because today communities are becoming more and more key stakeholders in these decisions, because unlike, as you said, 50, 100 years ago, mining organizations would just come and start mining operations without really engaging with communities. So do regulators have a way to ensure before they give license to operate that the stakeholders like communities have been actively engaged and have formed part of the conversations prior to mining operations starting?
So you are required by law as the mining company to engage. Without doing that, you're not going to get a license.
So it's not going to happen. Okay.
So you're required by law to set up the necessary engagements, ensure that you have consent, have proof that you have actually engaged. And it's not only a once-off engagement.
So it has to be continuous.
It's continuous, and it's on different aspects, on environmental issues, but also your social and labor plan is an engagement between yourselves, the local government, the communities. So the regulator, before they grant the license, must take all of those things into account.
Before they issue the license.
Before they issue. So you are required by law.
Is there economic incentive for mining companies to invest in sustainable practices, and how do you measure that incentive?
The incentive is simply to maintain your social license to operate. If you are running a mining operation where you're not taking social and environmental issues into account, you won't be operating for long. So the incentive, whether you like it or not, is to ensure that there is harmony within the communities. The community members see the benefit of having you within their community. If you cannot demonstrate that, you will not be mining for long. That's why you see protests in some areas. And the last thing you want as a mining company is to have people come to your gate. You're not going to mine. You can't mine.
To stop the operations.
Stop the operations, and that's the end of it.
And
it's amazing when you think about the impact of not mining for a day. The capital investment that goes into starting a mining operation means every single day
you should be productive.
You must be productive.
So
when the community members stop you for a day, it can run into millions.
It's a big issue.
So the incentive is to ensure that you have a social license to operate by doing the right thing with the community. But again, in South Africa, you're also doing something that is required by law.
Of course, in the previous discussion before you came down, we had a discussion around stakeholder expectations changing continuously. And let's stick with the stakeholder community that involves the community, the locals. How do we ensure that the expectations of the communities remain realistic and within the confines of the law? Because tomorrow they might say, build a road, and next week build a school, and the week after build a clinic. How do we ensure that there are boundaries and in terms of those expectations, particularly from the community? Where do you draw the line in terms of the responsibilities of a mining company?
So that's why the social and labor plan is such a powerful tool. Once you've engaged with the community and you've agreed on what you're going to do for the next 5 years.
Sure.
What you'll do in year 1, year 2, year 3, that's the contract between the mining company.
Change suddenly.
You can't change it. I'm sure there'll be others who will attempt to do so.
To do that.
But that's your contract. And now your role as the mining company is to ensure that you execute as per that contract that you have.
I see.
But on top of the social and labor plan, which is a regulated instrument, most mining companies have corporate social investment vehicles that they use. So you can think of it as a top-up to the social and labor plan, where every year, depending on how well the company does, there'll be a discretionary pool of money that gets used for additional community benefit. So on that, it's really the discretion of the mining company.
Sure.
But in the social and labor plan, that's a contract. And that contract ensures that as long as you are executing in line with what you've agreed, you should be okay to operate.
I just want to touch before we close. We're going to close soon. But you and I were talking about the energy transition briefly as we were preparing for this talk. Do you think to create long-term value creation, is energy transition or decarbonization going to accelerate that value creation for mining organizations? And are they really embarking on the wagon of change, most mining organizations, to take advantage of reduction of carbon footprint to accelerate sustainable practices? Or do you think it's something that is in the back burner for them?
So the energy transition, and it really depends on how you think of it.
Sure.
So for this conversation, I'm going to think of it from an African perspective.
Sure.
Or maybe even a South African perspective, where
Sure.
it's not only an energy transition, but it's a conversation that then brings discussions around what the just transition means. For the South African-based mining companies to be seen to be advancing the energy transition conversation
Sure.
is advantageous. So if I'm an investor sitting somewhere on Wall Street or somewhere in Europe, I obviously want to invest in a company that is pushing the energy transition agenda. So from a company perspective, that's a good thing. And obviously from an environmental perspective, the more companies use green energy, the better it is for the environment.
Yeah.
When you bring into the conversation the people aspect, and now I'm thinking of, say, Emalahleni. In Emalahleni, you have 100,000 people employed in the mining industry, anywhere between, I'd say, 600 and 800,000 people who in one way or the other depend on the coal mining sector. The energy transition does by definition mean moving away from the coal mining space. And so what does it mean for the 800,000 people? And that's a conservative number. For the coal mining companies, moving from coal mining to renewable energy means they give themselves an opportunity to remain viable and sustainable by transitioning from one form of a commodity in coal to another form. But for the people who are dependent on the coal mining sector, it's a different conversation. But I think globally, whether it's the UN, the World Bank, or the companies themselves, they are aware of the impact that the transition will have on the communities. And I think we have a responsibility as a sector to ensure that as that change happens, we are not leaving behind the people who have depended on this sector for so long.
Because it's going to take time, but unfortunately, the economic impact of the transition needs to always be considered. Unless there are alternative job opportunities for that 800, to using your example, it's going to be difficult for the economy or for the community to climb on the wagon of change in that instance. I want to talk before we close about the skills and the capabilities of leaders and practitioners in mining. Do you feel that they are having the requisite skills around sustainable mining now to be able to understand the benefits thereof? Or is there still a lot of work to impart knowledge, skills, and capabilities for practitioners and leaders to be more aware around sustainable mining?
I think more the latter. I'll make a general statement that as practitioners in the industry, it's always helpful for us to expose ourselves to what is best practice.
Sure.
Yes, maybe I knew how to rehabilitate 20 years ago, but just to carry forward that knowledge and hope that it will continue to serve me as a leader, I think it's quite restrictive. So it is important that we continue to train ourselves, expose ourselves to best practice, engage with people, not only those who are in the mining sector, but people from different sectors, and see where there are synergies.
Sure.
So yes, miners know how to mine, miners know how to rehabilitate, but when we engage with people from different sectors, we give ourselves an opportunity to do things differently. And maybe there's a better way to rehabilitate. Maybe there's a better way to mine. I think you can only learn from people in other industries. So to answer your question, there's always room for more training and development.
But you don't feel we're too far behind, especially if some of these practices are mandatory or regulatory. I mean, otherwise you're just going to lose your license. But I just hope it were more proactive than just compliance driven.
Yeah, and I think we are seeing some companies that are going beyond just the compliance approach. Again, if you are serious about your license to operate, you can go the compliance route and you can tag along, or you can say, what is best practice? And obviously, when you pursue best practice, you give yourself an opportunity to stand out from the rest.
Sure.
So we are seeing a few companies that are saying, we're not just satisfied with complying, we want to go beyond compliance. And I think the mining sector, we shouldn't forget that South Africa, when it comes to mining globally, we are not small players at all. These are people who most of them have been around the world.
Yeah.
And we also do have others from other parts of the world who work within the South African mining sector.
Yeah.
So we do have these best practices, but hopefully more companies will say, I not only want to comply with my 1% social and labor plan provision, can I do a bit more? And you can do a bit more without necessarily negatively impacting your bottom line.
Yeah.
You can create these alternative economies around the areas where you mine. Over time, the alternative economies should, in theory, just run on their own. And the more of that you have, the less dependence there is on you as the mining company.
Exactly.
And in so doing, you then maybe protect, it's not the right word, but you, let's say protect yourself from negative social impacts in the form of protests. So personally, I would encourage most or more mining companies to think about creating alternative economies around their mines. If you do that, I think then you're in really good standing.
I was even talking about outskilling in a different discussion, that if you've got people within the mining operation that you can give skills to do business outside in the community, it's even better, so that you leave that community better than you found it.
And it's a lot cheaper in the long run, because the dependence on you is reduced significantly.
My friend, we've come to an end of our discussion. I really wish we had more time. Definitely, we're going to explore this discussion. We didn't touch so much on the S and the G of the ESG, deliberately so, because I did want us to focus largely on the environment. But in the next episode, we're going to explore this discussion further, and I'm hoping you will be able to return and share your thoughts. Thank you so much for your time.